Good evening, students. Today I am going to discuss with you all the important points about the prose, the last lesson written by Alphonse Daudet. In this chapter, we see that France was defeated by Prussia in the war, and the French districts of Alsace and Lorraine passed into the hands of the Prussia. Prussians have imposed their German language in the schools of French districts. Another very important point, we have to understand that two important characters are there in this chapter. One is Mr. Hamel, the French teacher, and another a student French. Now I am going to discuss the fundamental points about this chapter. After reading this chapter, you must understand that what is the fundamental theme of this chapter. The fundamental theme of this chapter is about linguistic chauvinism. What does it mean? It means that one feels very proud of one's language and they consider other language inferior to their language. This is generally with the ruling class. Another very important point is the sub-theme. What is the sub-theme? Sub-theme is the thinking of the students and the teacher towards a particular language. Another very important point in this chapter that you must know, what is the message of this chapter? The message of this chapter reveals that the people and the students feel very bad when they don't take their language very seriously. The old people of that village and the students, they have not developed the command on their language. And we all know that language is the cultural identity of a nation. As long as a person is intact to his language, he cannot be dominated. He cannot be captured mentally, physically, intellectually by anyone. And Mr. Hamel is a very intellectual teacher who understands this reality that from the next day, German classes will be imposed on the students, and this is the last class. And that is why he is very seriously, very emotionally giving his best in the last class so that the students should understand and develop the command on the French language. Why? Because French language is their own language of the students. And if they don't develop the command, then they can intellectually, physically be very easily be made slave of the Prussians. Because this is a harsh reality that if any person who has not developed the command of their language, who is not proud of his own language, then he can be very easily be made slave. His independence can be dominated. He can be captured mentally, physically, emotionally, and this particular reality is very much understood by Mr. Hamel. And that is why he was feeling very repentant that the students were not serious when he was teaching in the class. And now the students are also feeling very repentant that their language is very important and they must know the language very nicely. Because Mr. Hamel, their French teacher, had made them realize that language is very important to anybody, individual personality, individual freedom. If any person is not very confident, very much aware about his language, then he can be easily dominated. Actually, language reveals the cultural identity of a person, of a nation. We have seen various examples are there in history that as long as a person is intact to his own language, he cannot be dominated, he cannot be captured. And Mr. Hamill is aware of the fact that the students and the villagers of this village have not learned their language, they have not developed the command on their language, and they can be easily dominated, they can be easily captured mentally and physically by the Prussians. And that is why he was giving his best, what he could do. And that is why he was giving motivation, he was giving a realization, he was awakening, he was making them aware that one's own language is very important, and that eventually reveals the cultural identity of a nation. Thank you, students.